Namaste, yogis. I invite you to take a seat and get comfortable. This will be a 4-part video series for my Seva project for my 300-hour yoga teacher training. It is a mythology-based Seva project on 64 asanas and their stories. The first 3 parts will be speaking on the book that I read, and the last part will be a yoga sequencing section to warm up our bodies and get moving a bit. First, I would like to read from the Seva project worksheet. The name of my workshop is The Myths Behind Yoga Poses, and the charity of my choice was Women's Fund Central Ohio.org, which can be found in my bio on this YouTube, and the Red Cross. So if you feel comfortable and eager enough, please donate blood to the Red Cross, or even time and clothes or whatever else they need. The intention of this Seva project was to immerse the viewer in the stories behind the yoga poses that we may or may not perform. Some of these poses are a bit advanced, but maybe you'll work your way up to them, and even knowing the myth behind them might inspire you in your yoga journey. The resources found and used was 64 Asanas and Their Stories by Deb Dutt Padanak and Matthew Rulick. Workshop will be delivered online in YouTube, so you're here, and I am inviting friends, family, and fellow yogis, and anyone on the 300-hour yoga class on Facebook. You only need an open mind and time to learn and embrace world culture of Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and the texts that are brought to us in these ancient religions. And I read the book twice. In the second read through, I took notes for the Seva, and I ended up writing about 35 pages. So, quite a bit to talk through. As I said, there will be 4 videos, so you can watch them at your leisure. And there is a lot to learn here. I tweaked the plan by setting the intention before beginning and adding more to several of the stories. So I basically just took more information, added it to some of the stories there I felt it was appropriate. And I have rehearsed this several times during the research and the planning, and there isn't much I'd do differently. So, as we begin, I will start with some background. Sources of many of the stories come from ancient Hindu texts like the Vedas, which is a collection of hymns and rituals to Vedic deities. The Ramayana, which is the story of the greatest king from the solar dynasty named Ram. The Mahabharata, a story of the ancient war between the Pandavas and the Kauravas of the lunar dynasty. The Puranas, which is the story of the Hindu Trinity. And the Buddhist text we will take these myths from is the Jatakas, or the rebirth stories of the Buddha to be. The Jainism text is the Trisasti Salaka Purusha Charitra, which is stories of the 63 great men who appear every eon. And I'm sorry if I did not pronounce that correctly, but it is quite tricky. To continue with some background, the 4 main gods mentioned are Devi, which is the female divine, Brahma, Shiva, and Vishnu, which are all the male divine. And all of these gods take on other forms, many of them being human, some of them not, and they take on different names while in this form. So be prepared to hear of some of the forms that they take on, whether masculine or feminine. So as we begin, some things to note. I will pause for about 15 to 20 seconds between each story to allow time for you to comment your questions that you may have, or comment anything that you like. If you enjoyed a particular story, you can feel free to comment about it. And yeah, let us begin. The first asana that we will talk about is bowing to the sun. Surya, the sun god, rides a chariot with 7 horses. The 7 horses represent the 7 days of the week. There's 12 wheels and 8 spokes in each wheel on this chariot. The 12 wheels represent the 12 months in a year and the 8 times in each day. He's accompanied by his wives Sanjana and Shaya. He was known to have taught Hanuman and the Ramayana, which we'll get into in several of these stories. In the Passionids, the sun god reveals divine potential is within all of us to the sage Yag Navalkya, and there are as many as 108 repetitions of bowing to the sun sequence, and it is done facing east towards the sun. One final note. Some of these poses have stories, some of them have facts or background on why the pose is important. So, we will wait a moment. The half moon pose. The moon god, known as Chandra or Soma, arose from the ocean of milk. He is known as the most beautiful god in Hindu and is associated with romantic desire. In Hinduism, the zodiac system is divided into 28 parts or constellations, one of which had disappeared due to a strained relationship between Chandra and his wives, because Chandra is married to the constellations, and that is why one of them disappeared. Chandra is usually depicted as a crescent waning moon, representing death and rebirth, as well as the Hindu god Shiva and their power. And we will get into death and rebirth a lot in this Seva project. It is very important in Buddhism and Hinduism. Shiva was known to save the moon or Chandra by giving energy to him before death. And this is why the Chandra is associated with Shiva and his power. This energy that Shiva gave to Chandra was yogic energy from doing yoga poses. And the reason why Chandra was going to die was because the moon was cursed by the fathers of his 28 wives for favoring the one wife or the missing constellation. We will now pause and reflect or take a moment for questions before we move on to the next asana. Pravatana Asana. In traditional Hindu rituals, gods were known to face east and devotees were known to face west. Directions play an important role in Hindu, Jain, and Buddhist mythology. East is associated with the rising sun, west is associated with the sea, north with immortality or stability, and the south is associated with death. The stretch of the east pose is done with the front side or east facing upward side. So this is our upward side and it's east facing. If you were to imagine this pose, it could be considered like a reverse tabletop. Just checking the time. Okay. Paschimottanasana asana, or the seated forward fold pose. This pose can also be called the stretch of the West, and in Hinduism, our face represents eastern direction in yoga, our backs represent western direction, our left side north, and our right side south. So they have things associated with them, but even in the human form, we are ourselves associated with a direction. In Hindu, Buddhism, and Jain mythology, each direction also has a guardian. The ordinal directions are such: northeast is the moon, southwest is the sun, northwest is fire, southwest is wind. Traditionally, the pose, seated forward fold, is done facing east toward the rising sun, and the back becomes the west. So we face east, and when we fold forward, our back becomes the west. We will reflect on the seated forward fold, or take a moment to ask any questions or say anything that you liked about the pose. The next pose we will talk about is Vriksha Asana, the tree pose. In Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain myths, trees are associated with gods, holy men, and beings called yakshas or yakshis. In Buddhism, Buddha became the enlightened one by sitting under the pipal tree. In Jainism, each and every Jaina meditates under particular trees to break free into the spiritual world. In Hinduism, Shiva had sat under the banyan tree and Vishnu the kadamba tree. It is told Brahma plucked his hair and placed it on the earth goddess, and that is the origin of plants as well. And I believe there's another story which mentions the origin of plants. We'll get to that near the end of the Seva, about 3/4 of the way through. Padma Asana, or lotus pose. In yoga, the lotus represents the womb of all existence, and it also represents purity in creation. The water rolling off the lotus represents detachment. In Hinduism, Brahma, which is the creator of the world, sits on a lotus flower that rises from Vishnu's navel. In Buddhism, it is believed a blooming lotus appeared wherever Buddha walked. And in Jainism, Padma is the name of Ram from the Ramayana, which translates to lotus pose, and he is traditionally non-violent in the Jainism version of the Ramayana. And later on, you'll get to hear that there's actually 3 spins of the Ramayana, and one for each belief: Buddhism, Jainism, and Hinduism. And in the Jainism Ramayana, he has his brother commit violence for him by asking him to. And in the lotus pose, maximum contact between the legs and earth can be done, and it's the most stable seated yoga pose. Bakasana, or crane pose. In Hindu, crane is associated with patience, concentration, and knowledge. In the Mahabharata, a crane is the guardian of a lake, who asks 5 brothers questions, and in arrogance 4 of them refuse to answer. As such, when they drink from the lake, they died instantly. However, the eldest brother answers to the crane when asked what is the greatest wonder of the world, and he replies that people live life every day as if they're immortal, yet people also die every day. In the Bhagavad, Krishna, as a child, killed a giant crane that attacks him, his cows, and his friend. And the crane is also associated with the goddess of knowledge, Saraswati. Krancha Asana, or Huron pose, will be the next pose we discuss. There are several instances Kranchas are brought into the romantic epic Ramayana. As the Krancha being forced to tell Ram his wife was taken by the Demon King. Its bent neck caused by a scuffle between Ram and Krancha, and its white feathers caused by Seva, who was Ram's wife's, tears while being abducted. And this is how the Krancha is said to have got its white feathers and its bent neck. The first ever poem was written about 2 Kranchas circling each other in a lover's dance when a hunter strikes down the male Krancha, Valmiki. Valmiki sees the wailing female Krancha and curses the hunter in poetry, and this is known to have been the first ever spoken poetry of the world. In southern India, there is a tale about a split mountain named after the Krancha. It is said the war god Kartikeya hurled a spear at a demon in the form of a Krancha who was hiding in the mountain, and this is what caused the mountain to split into 2. Kaka Asana, or crow pose. And if you notice, my hoodie has a crow on it. It may be hard to see on the video, but it's there. So the crow is associated with death in Hinduism. In the Ramayana, Jayanta, is the son of Indra, who is king of the Devas, and he took the form of a crow to disturb Ram and Sita while they were in the forest during exile. It is said the crow can only see from one side at a time because Ram pierced its eye with a blade of grass. Also, a demon in the form of a crow attacks a baby Krishna in the famous Bhagavata Purana, but Krishna kills the crow by catching it by its feet and strangling it. The crow is also associated with wisdom and storytelling because the immortal crow, Kabab Hushhundi, overheard a private conversation between Shiva and Shakti, sharing it with the world. The next pose, or asana, is Kakuta, which is rooster pose. In Hindu mythology, the rooster embodies the alpha male. This can be seen in Western mythology as well. And it's associated with the planet Mars and Murugan, the god of war, in South India. And in North India, it's associated with Kartikeya, who is the son of Shiva and Shakti and leads the celestial armies. In the Ramayana, Ram believes Sita has abandoned him until a rooster tells him she has been abducted by Ravana, who is a demon king. So Ram gifts the rooster with a golden crown of skin on the rooster's head, and this is said how the rooster got his feathers. Also notable, in the Buddhist Wheel of Life, the rooster is depicted with a snake and a pig, which are the symbols which indicates life's cravings which lead to suffering. So the rooster, snake, and pig are what indicate life's suffering um, and cravings in Buddhism. We got about 10 more minutes for this video. I hope you are enjoying these stories at your leisure. And once again, if you feel generous at all, donate to the Red Cross or the Women's Central Ohio Fund. And they are for women's rights in Central Ohio. They help pass laws and bills that help protect women and help women with equality. The next pose is Gomukhasana, or cow face pose. In ancient times, cows were an animal that could give food without being killed. It is for this reason, amongst others, why the cow is sacred in Hinduism. Cows were a metaphor for the earth and sustainable living, and are often closely associated with Krishna, the god. In ancient Hindu and Egyptian temples, they follow Gomukh architecture. And if you are unaware of Gomukh architecture, it's a really clever way to build a building where a narrow opening leads to a wider space. This can protect cities or towns or temples from being attacked or ambushed from a large group of people as they all got to file in to the narrow line. In Jainism, Yaksha and Yakshi were local gods, and they were guardians of the first of the 24 jinas, especially Gomukha, who was a cow-faced Yakshi. Vrishchikiyasana, or scorpion pose. The scorpion is associated with the Hindu goddess Chamunda, who fed on corpses, and herself is associated with battlefields and crematoriums. In tantric traditions, meditating on the undesirable attains wisdom on the nature of the world. And also, there's a story of a sage bathing in a river when she comes upon a scorpion trapped in between rocks. After saving the scorpion, they are stung, and an onlooker laughs at the sage, and the sage replies it was our nature to save the scorpion, and it was the scorpion's nature to sting, bringing upon the idea to live our lives without influence of others. Now, in the Western world, I'm sure you have heard a variation of this story where a snake is caught in a fire. And if you haven't, it basically tells the same tale, but with the variations of the animal and the incident that it is suffering. Once again, we are pausing to reflect in between the poses and the stories behind the poses. And if you have any questions, you can always comment, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Manjarasana, or cat's pose. Domestic cats are associated with the goddess Shakti, or Sadhwai, who facilitates childbirth. In Kerala, a story goes, Prince Mankanthra was asked by his mother to fetch milk of a tigress, but returned with a streak of tigresses, and this supposedly revealed his divinity. But it was unaware to him that his mother had actually planned this ruse, so Manakantha, finding this out, he renounces the throne and gives it to his brother and disappears to a mountaintop to live life as a yogi. And of course, tigresses are representations of cats. They are in the cat family. Makarasana, our crocodile pose, is the next story that we will talk about. Now, Makara means Capricorn in Indian, and you can think Capricorn like Western mythology in the constellations, right? And in Indian mythology, Capricorn is said to have had an elephant's head and a fish's tail. But in Western mythology, Capricorn has a goat's head and a fish's tail. So they both have fish tails, but in Indian mythology, it does have an elephant, and in Western, it has a goat. Now, Capricorn marks winter transforming into spring and is an emblem of the love god Krishna. The crocodile is also a known metaphor for worldly attachments, which could be very important to undo or detach from in Buddhism. Hanuman was known to overpower a crocodile who was a cursed yogi, and the yogi was cursed to transform into a crocodile. In similar stories in the Mahabharata, there are 5 asuras turned into crocodiles, and these asuras are equating to crocodiles to the power of lust. So not only is it worldly attachments, but is also lust that it's associated with. We got time for another story or two, and then you can join me for the second video where we will discuss even more stories from the 64 Asanas in our stories book, which I highly recommend this book. This is kind of like a reflection of it, and it has a lot of details, the Seva project, but the book itself, if you do have questions, you may find your answer there. If you're unable to get the book at this time, once again, I'm always going to be available to answer your questions as timely as I can on this YouTube channel. So the next pose is Bhujangasana, or cobra pose. The hooded cobra, which indicates a moment of stillness before striking, is considered special in India, particularly in yoga. So is the coiled cobra, which represents restraint and potentially unleashed energy. Copulating serpents are indicative of movement, and all 3 depictions are found in Indian temples. So in Indian temples, you can find the hooded cobra, the coiled cobra, and the copulating serpents or cobras. It is also believed the realm below the earth, Nagaloki, is the realm of snakes. And we may talk a little bit about that when we get into the Asuras and the Devas, as one lives in the heaven and the other lives below the earth. This is believed in Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. There is a serpent coiled around Shiva's neck, and Vishnu lies on the coils of Adeshesha, while Krishna, he is known to dance on the hood of Kilaya, yet another cobra. So both Shiva and Krishna, Shiva and Vishnu as Krishna have cobras. It is told a serpent rose to protect Buddha when he became the awakened one after escaping his palace from the rain and the sun with his hood. So a hooded cobra protected Buddha from the rain and sun. And that was just when he was young, I believe. But I'm not entirely sure myself. A similar serpent sheltered infant Krishna from rains as he was transported across the river Yamuna by his father to protect him from the murderous Kansa, who was king of Mathura. So there is also a story of a snake or a cobra protecting Krishna from rains. And in Jain mythology, time is imagined moving like a serpent. And for now, this video is over. We've reached a 30-minute mark. I'm going to continue on in a second video as soon as this one is uploaded. And I appreciate you for tuning in and listening. And yeah, these stories just get even more in depth, and the more you hear about them and the knowledge becomes acquired, the more they make sense. And it becomes less convoluted. So I will see you in the next video.